The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 miles of polished crystal floor. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their floating chairs, each one designed to accommodate their unique biology. The air hummed, with translation devices working overtime to convert clicks, whistles, growls, and color patterns into something resembling universal communication. Admiral Kethver of the Zephyrian Empire stood at the center of the hall, his forearms spread, wide in a gesture of absolute confidence. His silver skin gleamed under the artificial starlight that filtered through the crystal dome above. Around him, the other council members leaned forward with interest. Their various forms of eyes, sensors, and perception organs focused on his words. "Fellow members of the council," Kethver began, his voice carrying the authority of 3 centuries of galactic dominance. "We have received the human response to our ultimatum." A ripple of anticipation moved through the assembly. The Vextari delegation clicked their mandibles in what passed for polite attention, while the gaseous representatives of the Nebula Collective shifted their colors to show mild curiosity. Even the stone-like granite lords managed to express interest by slightly adjusting their massive forms. Kethver paused for effect, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled aliens. "They have refused." The reaction was immediate and predictable. Laughter, in its many forms, filled the great hall. The insectoid Vextari produced a chittering sound that made the translation devices work overtime. The aquatic Murkoths splashed enthusiastically in their water-filled chambers. Even the normally stoic silicon mines flickered their lights in what could only be described as amusement. "Refused?" Counselor Zixmoth spoke up, her tentacles curling with what her species displayed as humor.
"Act!"
The humans actually refused to demand. "From the Zephyrian Empire?" "Indeed," Kethver replied, his own amusement evident in the way his forearms moved in synchronized gestures. "They claim their outer colonies are sovereign human territory and will not be surrendered to what they call proper galactic authority." More laughter rippled through the hall. The humans had been a minor curiosity for the past 50 years, ever since their primitive ships had first ventured beyond their home system. They had established a few small colonies on worthless rocks that no other species wanted, built some basic mining operations, and generally tried to stay out of everyone's way. "How delightfully primitive," commented Speaker Velenash of the Crystal Singers, her voice creating harmonics that made the translation devices struggle. "Do they not understand the natural order of galactic civilization?" Kethver's expression grew more serious, though traces of amusement still lingered. "It appears they do not. Our diplomatic corps spent considerable time explaining the situation to them. We showed them recordings of our fleet actions against the Corn Rebellion, the tidal wars against the Murkath separatists, and the pacification of the Spiral Arm territories. Still they refused," asked another council member, genuine surprise coloring their translated words. "Not only did they refuse," Kethver continued, "but they have informed us that they are prepared to defend their territory with military force." The laughter that followed was louder and longer than before. Several species began communicating among themselves, sharing jokes that their translation devices couldn't quite capture. The very idea of the humans threatening military action against the Zephyrian Empire was beyond absurd. "What forces do they possess?" inquired War Chief Thukmar of the warrior clans, his massive form barely fitting into his floating chair. "Our intelligence suggests they have perhaps 30 vessels total, most of which are cargo haulers and mining ships." "Our analysis confirms this," Kethver replied, activating a holographic display that showed the human fleet in all its apparent inadequacy. 27 vessels of various sizes, all using primitive chemical propulsion systems. Their largest ship appears to be some sort of converted cargo vessel they call a battleship. The hologram showed a blocky, ungainly vessel that looked more like a flying warehouse than a warship. Its hull was covered in what appeared to be additional armor plating welded on as an afterthought. Crude weapon emplacements dotted its surface, and its engines glowed with the telltale orange of simple fusion reactors. "They call this the USS Defiance," Kethver said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Intelligence suggests it carries approximately 200 crew members and is armed with what our analysts describe as kinetic projectile weapons. Kinetic weapons? The question came from multiple sources simultaneously. The concept was so primitive that many species needed clarification. They appear to fire solid projectiles using electromagnetic acceleration, Kethver explained. Essentially, they throw rocks at their enemies. The laughter that followed was so intense that several species had to pause their translation devices. To avoid overloading, the idea of using kinetic weapons in an age of energy shields and antimatter warheads was like bringing a stone club to a battle between gods. How charming, observed Counselor Zixmoth, her tentacles now curling with genuine affection. They still fight like their ancestors did on their homeworld. It's almost endearing. Indeed, agreed Kethver. Our tactical analysis suggests that their weapons would be completely ineffective against modern shield technology. The kinetic energy would be absorbed and dispersed long before it could cause any meaningful damage. The display changed to show a comparative analysis between human and Zephyrian technology. The difference was staggering. Where human ships used fusion reactors, Zephyrian vessels contained miniature stars. Where humans relied on chemical propulsion, Zephyrians manipulated antimatter. Where humans fired chunks of metal, Zephyrians wielded coherent energy beams that could slice through planetoids. The question before us, Kethver continued, is whether this situation even warrants a military response. Perhaps a single ship would be sufficient to demonstrate the futility of their resistance. No, interrupted Grand Admiral Morketh, the Supreme Commander of the Galactic Defense Force. Should not dismiss them so easily. Every species that has joined the galactic community has done so after a demonstration of our overwhelming superiority. The humans deserve the same courtesy. How many ships do you recommend? Asked Kethver. 3 should be sufficient, Morketh replied after a moment's consideration. A cruiser squadron with standard complement, enough to demonstrate our capabilities without appearing to take their threat seriously. The council members exchanged glances, clicks, and color patterns that all conveyed agreement. 3 Zephyrian cruisers against the entire human fleet was generous, to the point of being insulting. There is one more thing, Kethver said, his tone becoming more serious. The humans have requested that this engagement be conducted in the Kepler 442 system, near their outermost colony. They claim they wish to minimize civilian casualties. How considerate of them, commented Speaker Velanash. They choose their own graveyard. When do they expect this demonstration to take place? Asked Counselor Zixmoth. Then the next standard week, Kethver replied. They say they need time to prepare their forces. A week to prepare 30 cargo ships for battle, laughed War Chief Thokmer. Perhaps they need time to weld more armor plating onto their hulls. Or to load their rock-throwing machines, added another council member. Causing fresh waves of laughter, Kethver raised one of his hands for silence. The motion before the council is simple. We will send a cruiser squadron to the Kepler 442 system to demonstrate Zephyrian superiority and encourage human compliance with galactic law. All in favor? The vote was unanimous. 47 species, representing billions of beings across the galaxy, agreed that 3 ships would be more than sufficient to handle the human problem. As the council session ended, the various representatives began to disperse. None of them noticed the small, unremarkable probe that had been silently observing their proceedings from the shadows of the Great Hall. The device, no larger than a coffee cup and designed to be completely invisible to conventional sensors, had recorded every word, every gesture, and every casual dismissal of human capabilities. Deep in space, the probe's data stream reached the USS Defiance, where Captain Jake Morrison reviewed the intelligence with growing satisfaction. The aliens had made their first mistake by underestimating humanity. Soon, they would learn that some species fought not just with technology, but with the will to win at any cost. The void of space around the Kepler 442 system had never seen anything like the 3 ships that now approached its outer boundary. Each Zephyrian cruiser was a work of art, their hulls gleaming like polished mirrors that reflected the distant stars. They moved with the graceful precision of dancers, their antimatter engines creating barely visible distortions in space-time itself. Admiral, Kethfer stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Stellar Majesty, watching the tactical display. With casual interest, his forearms moved in slow, confident gestures as he reviewed the sensor data streaming in from his ship's advanced detection systems. Any sign of the human fleet? He asked his tactical officer, Sub-Commander Veltash. Negative, Admiral Shi, replied, her own forearms dancing across her control interface. Our sensors detect only the usual background radiation and the human colony's civilian traffic. Kethfer's expression showed mild annoyance. Perhaps they have reconsidered their foolish decision to resist. The three Zephyrian ships continued their approach, their sensors sweeping the system for any sign of the promised human resistance. The colony itself was a small affair, perhaps 50,000 humans living in domed cities on a planet that barely qualified as habitable. Mining stations dotted the asteroid belt, their primitive fusion reactors glowing like tiny stars. Admiral, came a voice from the communications station. We are receiving a transmission from the colony. Put it through, Kethfer ordered, expecting to hear words of surrender. Instead, a human voice filled the bridge, speaking in the crude but functional galactic standard that humans had learned over the past decades. Zephyrian vessels, this is Colony Administrator Pete Johnson. We have been expecting you. Kethfer activated his translator and responded. Administrator Johnson, I am Admiral Kethfer of the Zephyrian Empire. We have come to accept your surrender and discuss the terms of your integration into proper galactic society. There was a pause before Johnson responded. Admiral, I appreciate your directness, but I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. We're not surrendering today. Then where is your fleet? Kethfer asked, his tone becoming more stern. Our intelligence indicated that humanity was prepared to resist with military force. Oh, they are, Johnson replied, and there was something in his voice that Kethfer's translator couldn't quite capture. You just haven't seen them yet. Before Kethfer could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. Sub-Commander Veltash looked up from her station with confusion written across her features. Admiral, I'm detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the direction of the asteroid belt, she reported. The signatures are consistent with fusion reactors, but they're moving far too quickly to be mining vessels. Kethfer turned to study the tactical display as 7 new contacts appeared on the screen. They were moving at speeds that seemed impossible for ships using chemical propulsion, their fusion drives burning at levels that should have been catastrophic for their primitive reactor systems. Enhance the display, Kethfer ordered. The screen flickered, and suddenly the 7 approaching vessels came into sharp focus. They were unlike anything the Zephyrians had seen before. Where their own ships were elegant and streamlined, these human vessels looked like they had been built for war and nothing else. The largest of the ships, presumably the USS Defiance, was a massive, angular structure that seemed to be more weapon than spacecraft. Its hull was covered in thick armor plating that gave it the appearance of a flying fortress. Gun ports dotted its surface, and strange projections extended from its sides like the spines of some ancient sea creature. By the ancient stars, whispered Veltash, look at the size of that thing. The USS Defiance was indeed enormous, easily twice the size of any Zephyrian cruiser. Its 6 companion vessels, while smaller, were no less intimidating. Each one bristled with weapons and sensor arrays, their hulls scarred and pitted as if they had already seen extensive combat. Admiral, came Johnson's voice over the communications channel, I'd like you to meet Captain Jake Morrison of the USS Defiance. I believe he has something to say to you. The communication channel switched, and a new voice came through, speaking with the calm confidence of someone who had seen real war. Admiral Kethfer, this is Captain Morrison, understand? You're here to discuss our surrender. Kethfer straightened, his forearms spreading in a gesture of authority. Captain Morrison, I am prepared to accept your surrender and discuss reasonable terms for your integration into galactic society. Your resistance is admirable, but futile. I appreciate the offer, Admiral, Morrison replied, but I'm afraid we'll have to decline. You see, we've been studying your people for quite some time. We've noticed something interesting about the way you fight wars. And what might that be? Kethver asked, his tone becoming more condescending. You fight like gentlemen, Morrison said simply. Nice, clean energy weapons. Elegant tactics. Minimum collateral damage. Very civilized. As it should be, Kethver replied proudly. Warfare should be conducted with honor and precision. I'll see, that's where we differ, Morrison continued. We don't fight to be honorable. We fight to win. On the tactical display, the 7 human ships had formed into a loose formation that made no sense, according to standard galactic military doctrine. They were to spread out to provide mutual support, yet too close together to avoid area effect weapons. Captain Morrison, Kethver said, his patience beginning to wear thin, your vessels are primitive by galactic standards. Your weapons are crude. Your defense is inadequate. I do not wish to destroy you, but I will if necessary. I understand your position, Admiral, Morrison replied. But before we get started, I have a question for you. In all your centuries of galactic warfare, have you ever faced an enemy that used kinetic weapons? Kethver paused, confused by the question. Kinetic weapons are primitive and ineffective against modern shielding technology. No civilized species has used them for millennia. That's what I thought, Morrison said, and there was something in his voice that made Kethver suddenly uneasy. Lieutenant Commander Phillips, you may fire when ready. The next few seconds changed everything. The Zephyrians thought they knew about warfare. The USS Defiance erupted in a display of raw violence. That confused every sensor on the Zephyrian ships. Instead of the expected energy beams or particle weapons, the human ship launched what appeared to be simple metal projectiles. But these weren't simple at all. The railgun rounds, each one a solid tungsten penetrator the size of a telephone pole, left the human ship at velocities that made the Zephyrian computers struggle to track them. They moved at significant fractions of light speed, their kinetic energy building to levels that would have impressed the designers of planetary bombardment systems. The first round struck the Stellar Majesty's forward shields with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The energy barriers designed to disperse and redirect energy attacks simply had no mechanism to deal with a physical object carrying such enormous kinetic energy. The shield collapsed. The tungsten rod punched through the ships. Was made of tissue paper, tearing through 3 decks before its internal explosive charge detonated. The explosion sent shockwaves through the ship that made the artificial gravity systems fail and threw crew members across their stations. Impossible, Kethver gasped, pulling himself up from the deck where he had been thrown. Our shields are rated for gigawatt energy weapons. Admiral Veltash called out, her voice tight with panic. The humans are firing again. The 2nd and 3rd human ships had joined the attack, their railguns sending more kinetic projectiles toward the Zephyrian fleet. The elegant cruisers, designed for fighting civilized wars against civilized opponents, found themselves facing weapons that their designers had never imagined. The 2nd Zephyrian ship, the Crystal Dawn, tried to maneuver away from the incoming fire, but its graceful curves and artistic design made it an easy target. 2 tungsten rods struck its engine section. The antimatter containment failure that followed lit up the void like a miniature star. All ships evasive maneuvers, Kethver ordered, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. The problem was that the Zephyrian ships had never been designed for evasive action. Their battles were typically fought at long range with opponents who followed predictable patterns and used familiar weapons. The human ships, with their crude but effective maneuvering systems, were moving in ways that made targeting difficult. Admiral K. Morrison's voice over the communication channel. Are you ready to discuss terms now? Kethver looked at his tactical display, watching as his beautiful ships tried desperately to avoid the crude but devastatingly effective human weapons. His 3rd ship, the Void Dancer, was already showing damage from near misses, its elegant hull scarred by debris from the kinetic impacts. This is not warfare, he said finally. This is butchery. No, Admiral Morrison replied, his voice carrying the weight of experience. This is what happens when you bring elegant weapons to a real fight. We tried to warn you, but you wouldn't listen. For the first time in 3 centuries, the Zephyrian Empire was discovering what it meant to face an an enemy that didn't fight by the rules. The bridge of the Stellar Majesty shook again as another human kinetic round passed dangerously close to the ship's hull. Admiral Kethfer gripped his command chair with all four arms, his silver skin now pale with shock. Around him, his crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to understand weapons that shouldn't exist in civilized warfare. "Damage report," he called out, his voice no longer carrying the confident authority it had possessed just minutes earlier. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12, reported his damage control officer. The kinetic impact created fractures throughout the forward section. We're losing atmosphere in 6 compartments." Subcommander Veltash looked up from her tactical station, her expression showing the same confusion that filled the bridge. "Admiral, their weapons are completely outside our combat parameters. Our targeting systems can't predict their trajectory patterns because they don't follow standard energy weapon physics." On the main display, the 7 human ships continued their relentless advance. Unlike the graceful dance of traditional galactic warfare, these vessels moved with the brutal efficiency of predators closing in on wounded prey. Their formation made no sense according to established military doctrine, yet somehow it was working. "Admiral," came Captain Morrison's voice over the communication channel. "I'm going to give you one more chance to withdraw. Take your ships and leave this system." Kethfer's pride fought against his growing fear. The Zephyrian Empire had never retreated from a battle, especially not against a primitive species using crude weapons. "Captain Morrison, you may have surprised us with your barbaric tactics, but we still possess superior technology. Our energy weapons will cut through your primitive hull plating like paper." "Feel free to try," Morrison replied calmly. The remaining 2 Zephyrian ships, the Stellar Majesty and the Void Dancer, turned their weapons toward the approaching human fleet. Energy beams lanced through space, brilliant streams of concentrated power that should have vaporized the human ships on contact. Instead, something unexpected happened. The energy weapons struck the human vessels and seemed to simply disappear. The beams scattered and dispersed across the ship's hulls, creating spectacular light shows but causing no apparent damage. "What is happening?" Kethfer demanded. Veltash stared at her instruments in disbelief. "Admiral, their hull plating appears to be designed specifically to absorb and disperse energy weapons. Our beams are being scattered across multiple layers of ablative armor." On the USS Defiance, Captain Morrison smiled grimly as he watched the alien energy weapons splash harmlessly against his ship's hull. Chief Engineer Carlos Rodriguez had spent months developing the ablative armor system, studying captured alien technology to understand exactly how energy weapons worked. "Captain," reported his tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Phillips. "Their energy weapons are having minimal effect. The ablative layers are dissipating the beam energy exactly as designed." "Good," Morrison replied. "Now let's show them what happens when you bring the wrong weapons to a fight. Target their weapon systems. I want those energy projectors disabled." "Aye, Captain," Phillips responded, his fingers dancing across his targeting console. Firing. Solutions locked. The USS Defiance fired again, but this time the railgun rounds were different. Instead of solid penetrators, these were cluster munitions designed to spread their damage across a wider area. The tungsten fragments struck the Void Dancer's weapon arrays, turning the elegant energy projectors into twisted metal and sparking electronics. "Their targeting is too precise," Veltash reported with growing panic. "They're not firing random shots. They're systematically disabling our combat systems." Kethfer watched in horror as his beautiful ships were methodically dismantled by weapons that any civilized species would have discarded millennia ago. The humans weren't just fighting differently. They were fighting with a level of brutal efficiency that the galactic community had forgotten existed. "All ships fall back to defensive positions," he ordered, but even as he spoke, he knew it was too late. The human fleet had closed to what any reasonable military commander would consider suicidal range. The USS Defiance and its companion vessels were now so close that the Zephyrian ships couldn't effectively maneuver without risking collision. Admiral Morrison's voice came through the communication system again. "You're fighting this battle all wrong. You're trying to maintain distance and use superior firepower, But that only works when your opponent plays by the same rules. Do you mean? Kethfer asked, though he was beginning to understand. You fight like this is a chess game, Morrison explained. Beautiful moves, elegant strategies, everything planned and predictable. But we don't play chess. We play to win. As if to emphasize his point, the USS Relentless, commanded by Captain Steve Parker, suddenly accelerated directly toward the Stellar Majesty. The human ship's fusion engines burned at levels that should have been catastrophic, pushing the vessel far beyond its supposed design limits. They're on a collision course, Veltash reported. Impact in 30 seconds. Evasive maneuvers, Kethper ordered, but the Stellar Majesty's elegant design worked against it. The ship had been built for beauty and efficiency, not for the kind of desperate maneuvering that combat sometimes required at the last possible moment. USS Relentless altered course, passing within mere meters of the Zephyrian flagship. As it did, its point defense systems opened fire, sending hundreds of small, kinetic projectiles into the larger ship's hull at point-blank range. The effect was devastating. The Stellar Majesty's hull, designed to withstand energy weapons at long range, was completely unprepared for a shotgun blast of tungsten pellets at close range. Atmosphere vented from dozens of small holes, and internal systems failed as the projectiles found their way into vital components. "This is madness," Kethfer whispered, watching his ship's systems fail one by one. Came Morrison's voice. "This is what happens when you fight someone who remembers that the point of war is to win, not to look good doing it." The USS Defiance moved closer, its massive bulk now dominating the tactical display. Morrison's ship was scarred and battered from decades of hard use, but it radiated a sense of deadly purpose that the elegant Zephyrian vessels completely lacked. Admiral Morrison continued, "Your ships are beautiful. They're works of art, but they're not weapons of war. They're the ships of a civilization that's forgotten what real fighting looks like." "We have fought many wars," Kethfer protested weakly. "No, you fought many battles," Morrison corrected. "Clean, civilized engagements with rules and honor and minimal casualties. But war isn't clean, Admiral. War is about survival, and sometimes survival means doing whatever it takes to win." The human fleet had now completely surrounded the two remaining Zephyrian ships. Their weapons remained trained on the alien vessels, but they held their fire, waiting for their admiral's next command. "You have a choice," Morrison said. "You can continue this engagement and lose both remaining ships. Or you can withdraw and report back to your superiors that maybe, just maybe, they underestimated us." Kethper looked around his damaged bridge, seeing the fear and confusion in his crew's eyes. These were soldiers who had spent their careers fighting civilized wars against civilized opponents. They had never faced an enemy that fought like the humans did. "If we withdraw," he said finally, "what guarantee do we have that you won't pursue us?" Morrison replied honestly, "But I'll tell you what I will do. I'll give you safe passage out of this system, and I'll make sure word gets back to your Galactic Council that humanity is ready to discuss terms." "Terms?" Kethfer asked. "We want a seat at the table," Morrison explained. "We want to be part of the galactic community, but as equals, not as subjects. We want it understood that human space is human space." The Admiral looked at his tactical display one more time, seeing his beautiful ships reduced to damaged hulks by weapons that shouldn't have been effective against modern technology. The humans had done more than win a battle. It had demonstrated that the entire foundation of galactic military thinking was flawed. "Very well," he said finally. "We will withdraw and carry your message to the Council." "Thank you, Admiral," Morrison replied. "And Admiral, the next time someone tells you that a primitive species wants to fight, you might want to ask them what they mean by primitive." As the battered Zephyrian ships began their long journey home, Kethfer realized that the galaxy had just changed. Forever. The humans had introduced something that the civilized species had forgotten: the willingness to fight, not just to win battles, but to survive wars. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called within hours of Admiral Kethfer's transmission. The great crystal hall buzzed with urgent conversations in dozens of languages as representatives tried to understand what had happened. In the Kepler 442 system, Counselor Zixmoth floated near the center of the assembly. Her tentacles curled tight with anxiety, Around her, the other council members displayed their own species equivalent of distress. The normally confident Vexery clicked their mandibles in rapid, nervous patterns, while the gaseous nebula collective shifted through colors that indicated deep concern. "Play the transmission again," demanded War Chief Thokmer, his massive form trembling with barely controlled rage. The holographic display activated, showing the damaged Zephyrian ships limping away from human space. Admiral Kethfer's image appeared, his silver skin dulled with exhaustion and his forearms moving in gestures of defeat. "The human fleet consists of 7 vessels," his recorded voice reported. "They use kinetic weapons exclusively, with no energy-based armaments detected. Your ships appear to be specifically designed to counter our standard combat doctrine." "It's possible," growled Thakmer. "No species develops weapons without first studying their enemies."
Out!
"How could they know our weaknesses?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The implications were disturbing. If the humans had designed their ships specifically to counter galactic military technology, it meant they had been studying their potential enemies for years, possibly decades. Grand Admiral Morketh stepped forward, his ancient form moving with the careful precision of someone who had seen too many wars. "The tactical analysis is clear. Humans didn't stumble into this victory. They planned it. But how?" asked Speaker Velenash, her harmonic voice creating discordant notes that reflected her confusion. "Our intelligence networks detected no human espionage activities, no infiltration attempts, no stolen technology, because they didn't need to steal anything," Morketh replied grimly. "They observed. They watched our fleet actions against other species. They studied our tactics, our weapons, our ship designs. And then they built a fleet specifically designed to counter everything we do." The council chamber fell silent as the full implications of this revelation sank in. For centuries, the galactic powers had fought their wars in public, broadcasting their victories as demonstrations of power. They had never considered that someone might be watching and learning. "We need to send a larger force," declared Admiral Vorthok of the Stellar Navy. "A full battle group. Show them that their primitive tactics won't work against superior numbers." "How many ships?" asked Counselor Zixmoth. 50 vessels, Vorthok replied confidently. "Battleships, cruisers, and support craft. Enough firepower to reduce their entire fleet to space dust." But even as he spoke, new intelligence was arriving from the frontier. Scout ships reported movement in human space. Lots of movement. Council members announced Intelligence Director Keftel, his insectoid form clicking urgently. "We have new information. Human ships are moving throughout their territory.
Ow.
Our count has increased from 7 vessels to 12. 12? Vorthok laughed. "Still hardly a threat to a proper battle group." "The composition has changed," Keftel continued. 4 of the new vessels appear to be similar to the USS Defiance in size and configuration. The others are smaller, but appear to be armed with the same kinetic weapon systems. On his flagship, the USS Defiance, Captain Morrison reviewed the latest intelligence reports with satisfaction. The alien response was exactly what he had predicted. They were escalating, just as humans would have done in their position. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Commander Phillips, "we're receiving coded transmissions from the other battle groups. All ships report ready status." Morrison nodded. The human fleet had grown, but not in the way the aliens expected. Instead of building more ships, they had revealed ships that had been hiding in asteroid fields, behind planetary bodies, and in the outer reaches of uninhabited systems. "How many ships do we have available now?" Morrison asked. 12 in the immediate area, Phillips replied. "But if we include the reserve squadrons and the ships stationed near our other colonies, we have approximately 40 vessels ready for combat operations." The number was impressive, considering that galactic intelligence had estimated the entire human fleet at less than 30 ships. But the aliens had made a critical error in their assessment. They had counted cargo ships, mining vessels, and colony transports as part of the human military because they couldn't distinguish between civilian and military vessels in human space. The truth was that every human ship was potentially a military vessel. The cargo ships could be quickly converted to carry kinetic weapons. The The mining vessels were already equipped with powerful industrial lasers and fusion cutting tools. Even the colony transports carried defensive systems that could be turned offensive with minimal modification. "Sir," came a voice from the communication station, receiving a transmission from Admiral Parker on the USS Relentless. "Put him through," Morrison ordered. Captain Steve Parker's face appeared on the screen, his expression grim but determined. "Jake, our scouts report a large alien fleet assembling near the Galactic core. Looks like they're planning to send everything." "They have? How large?" Morrison asked. 50 ships minimum, possibly more. Battleships, cruisers, the works. They're not taking any chances this time." Morrison considered this information carefully. Our 50 alien ships against 40 human vessels seemed like poor odds, but the numbers didn't tell the whole story. Aliens were still thinking in terms of traditional warfare, where superior technology and numbers guaranteed victory. Steve Morrison said finally, "Send word to all battle group commanders. It's time to implement Plan Omega." Plan Omega had been developed years earlier, when human military strategists first realized that they would eventually face the combined might of the galactic powers. It was based on a simple principle. If you can't match your enemy's technology, change the rules of engagement. "All ships prepare for deep space deployment," Morrison announced over the fleet communication network. "We're not going to wait for them to come to us." The alien strategy was predictable. It would mass their forces, approach human space in overwhelming strength, and demand surrender. It was the same approach they had used successfully against dozens of other species. But humans had studied those previous conflicts. They knew that alien fleets operated with predictable supply lines, followed established movement patterns, and relied on their technological superiority to overwhelm opposition. Captain Phillips reported, "All ships report ready for jump. Fusion drives are at maximum burn, and kinetic weapons are loaded with armor-piercing rounds." Morrison looked at the tactical display showing the positions of both fleets. The aliens were still assembling their forces, confident that superior numbers and technology would guarantee victory. They had no idea that the human fleet was about to do something that no civilized species had attempted in centuries. "All ships," Morrison announced, "execute jump to coordinates Alpha 7. We're going to hit them while they're still getting organized." The 12 human ships vanished from the Kepler 442 system in a burst of fusion fire, leaving behind only empty space and the lingering radiation signatures of their departure. 3 hours later, when the alien scout ships finally detected the energy signatures, they found nothing but empty space. The human fleet had simply disappeared. "Where did they go?" demanded Grand Admiral Morketh when the report reached the Galactic Council. "Unknown," replied Intelligence Director Keftel. "They departed the system at maximum velocity, but our tracking systems lost them in the radiation shadow of the local star." For the first time in galactic history, a fleet had simply vanished without a trace. The aliens had superior sensors, faster ships, and better tracking technology, yet somehow 12 primitive human vessels had evaded detection. "Find them," Morketh ordered. "Deploy every scout ship, every sensor array, every detection system we have. They cannot simply disappear." They had disappeared, and they were already moving toward their target. The human fleet was about to teach the galactic powers another lesson about the difference between fighting battles and fighting wars. Morrison smiled as he watched. The star chart scrolled past on his navigation display. The aliens expected humans to defend their territory and wait for attack. Instead, they were about to discover that humans preferred to take the fight to their enemies. The war was about to change again. The Zephyrian staging area at Rigel Prime had never been more heavily defended. 50 of the galaxy's most advanced warships floated in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the confidence of technological superiority. Stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Victory, reviewing the final preparations for the assault on human space. "All ships report ready status," announced his tactical officer. "Fleet deployment is complete. We have battleships, cruisers, and support vessels in optimal formation." Morketh nodded with satisfaction. This was the largest military force assembled in over a century. The combined firepower represented here could destroy entire star systems. Against 12 primitive human ships, it seemed like using a hammer. To crush an insect? Begin final approach to human territory, he ordered. Maintain formation and prepare for alarms, began screaming throughout the bridge before he could finish his sentence. Emergency lights bathed the command center in harsh red light as tactical displays showed impossible readings.
Admiral?
His sensor officer called out, her voice tight with panic. We have multiple contacts appearing throughout the fleet formation. They're inside our defensive perimeter. Impossible, Morketh replied, but even as he spoke, he could see the truth. On his displays, 12 human ships had somehow materialized in the middle of his carefully arranged fleet, peering between his own vessels like ghosts materializing from empty space. The USS Defiance hung less than a kilometer from the Eternal. Victory's starboard sighed, its scarred hull radiating menace. Around it, the other human ships had positioned themselves with surgical precision, one targeting multiple alien vessels simultaneously. How did they get so close? Morketh demanded. Unknown, Admiral, his tactical officer replied. Our sensors detected no approach. They simply appeared. Captain Morrison's voice filled the bridge through the communication system, calm and professional, despite the chaos erupting around them. Grand Admiral Morketh, this is Captain Morrison of the Human Defense Force. I believe you were looking for us. Morketh struggled to understand what had happened. His fleet had been spread across several light years of space, their sensor networks, covering every possible approach route. No force should have been able to penetrate their defenses undetected. Captain Morrison, he replied, trying to regain his composure, your tactics are underhanded and dishonorable. No civilized species would resort to such deception. Admiral Morrison replied, we tried to explain this to your colleague earlier. We don't fight to be honorable. We fight to win. The human ships opened fire simultaneously, their kinetic weapons sending tungsten rounds through the alien formation at velocities that made tracking impossible. But this time, the attack was different. Instead of targeting individual ships, the humans had calculated firing solutions that would hit multiple targets with each shot. The first tungsten rod passed through the shields, 3 different alien vessels before its momentum was finally stopped. The second round struck a battleship's reactor core, and the antimatter explosion that followed damaged for nearby ships. Within 30 seconds, half of the alien fleet was either destroyed or critically damaged. This is not warfare, Morketh gasped, watching his beautiful fleet being systematically destroyed. This is butchery. Admiral Morrison corrected. This is what happens when you bring a parade formation to a real fight. The truth was becoming clear to Morketh and the surviving alien commanders. The humans hadn't just appeared in their midst by accident. They had studied the alien fleet formations, calculated the optimal positions for maximum damage, and executed a plan that turned the aliens' own formation against them. All ships, scatter formation, Morketh ordered desperately. Break formation and engage individually, but it was too late. The human ships had positioned themselves perfectly, and now they moved with deadly precision through the alien fleet. They used the confusion and debris from their initial attack to mask their movements, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before return fire could find them. Admiral Morrison's voice came through the chaos. I'm prepared to discuss. Terms, Morketh replied, his voice hollow with defeat. Immediate withdrawal of all alien forces from human space, Morrison stated. Recognition of human territorial sovereignty. And a permanent seat for humanity on the Galactic Council with full voting rights. The Council will never agree to such demands, Morketh protested. Morrison said, and there was something in his voice that made the alien commander pause. Look around you. Just destroyed the largest military force assembled in galactic history using 12 ships and tactics that your people can't even understand. Do you really think the Council has a choice? Morketh looked at his tactical display, seeing the wreckage of 50 of the galaxy's most advanced warships floating in space around him. His own flagship was the only vessel still capable of faster-than-light travel, and even it was damaged beyond effective combat capability. How, he asked finally, how did you do this? We studied you, Morrison replied simply. For 50 years, we watched every battle you fought, every tactic you used, every weakness you displayed. We learned that you fight like this is a game with rules, while we remember that war is about survival. The communication channel switched to a broader frequency, and suddenly Morrison was speaking to every surviving alien ship in the system. This is Captain Morrison to all surviving vessels. You have 10 minutes to evacuate this system. Any ship remaining after that time will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. One by one, the damaged alien ships began jumping too faster than light speeds, their elegant hulls scarred and broken. The Eternal Victory was among the last to leave Orkith. Taking one final look at the human ships that had so completely outfought his superior force. Captain Morrison, he said finally, this changes everything. Yes, Admiral Morrison replied, it does. 3 days later, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The Great Crystal Hall was filled with representatives displaying various forms of distress, confusion, and fear. The reports from Rigel Prime had shaken the foundation of everything they thought they knew about galactic warfare. Counselor Zixsmith floated at the center of the assembly. Her tentacles curled in patterns that indicated deep concern. The motion before the council is simple, she announced. The human delegation has requested immediate recognition as a galactic power, with full territorial sovereignty and council representation. They destroyed 50 ships with 12 vessels, observed War Chief Thakmer, his massive form trembling with what might have been respect or fear. Their casualties were 0. How is that possible? Asked Speaker Velenash, her harmonic voice creating notes of confusion. Because they don't fight the way we do, replied Grand Admiral Morkith. His image transmitted from the medical facilities where he was recovering from his injuries. They don't care about honor or tradition or fighting fair. They care about winning. The holographic display activated, showing Captain Morrison standing on the bridge of the USS Defiance. His uniform was still rumpled from combat, but his eyes held the quiet confidence of someone who had just rewritten the rules of galactic civilization. Honored members of the Council, Morrison began. Humanity requests nothing more than what every other species here possesses. We want recognition as equals, respect for our territorial boundaries, and a voice in galactic affairs. And if we refuse? Asked one of the council members. Morrison's expression didn't change. Then you'll discover that 12 ships was just the beginning. We have 40 vessels currently deployed, with more under construction. Each one is designed specifically to counter your military capabilities. This is blackmail, protested another representative. No, Morrison replied calmly. This is diplomacy. We're offering to share our tactical innovations with the Council. It seems you could all benefit from our perspective on defense strategy. Chamber filled with various forms of alien discussion. The assembled representatives understood that humanity had fundamentally changed the balance of power in the galaxy. The species they had dismissed as primitive had demonstrated capabilities that their advanced civilizations had forgotten existed. There is one additional requirement, Morrison continued. We want to guarantee that no galactic power will attempt to subjugate or control any species that cannot defend itself. The age of conquest is over. The vote was unanimous. Every species, every empire, every collective agreed to humanity's terms. After all, when facing an uncertain galaxy, it was better to have the humans as allies than as enemies. Welcome to the Galactic Council, Counselor Zixsmith announced formally. May your perspective bring wisdom to our deliberations. Morrison smiled, knowing that the galaxy would never be quite the same. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through superior technology, but through superior determination and the willingness to fight wars rather than battles. The species that brought kinetic weapons to an energy fight had just become the galaxy's newest superpower.